When I pulled into my driveway after 9 months overseas, the first thing I noticed wasn't the car parked where mine should have been. It was the curtains. I didn't own curtains like that. Bright blue. Floral pattern. Moving slightly behind the glass like someone had just walked past. My duffel bag slid off my shoulder as I stepped out of the car. The house looked the same from a distance, same brick, same porch light, same American flag mounted by the garage. But something felt wrong. I walked up to the front door and slid my key into the lock. It didn't turn. I tried again. Nothing. That's when the door opened from the inside. A man I'd never seen before stood there holding a toddler on his hip. "Can I help you?" he asked. I stared at him. "Yeah," I said slowly. "You can tell me why you're standing in my house." His expression shifted from confusion to concern. "We're renting this property," he replied. "Signed a lease 2 months ago. Through the HOA. The HOA. While I was deployed overseas. While I was sleeping in desert sand and dodging mortar fire. They declared my home abandoned. They changed the locks. They rented it out. And they thought I wouldn't come back. What they didn't realize was that I didn't come home alone. My entire unit was returning this week. And soldiers don't take betrayal lightly. If you believe the people who fight for their country deserve loyalty in return, hit like, drop Stand with Soldiers in the comments, and subscribe to the channel. Because what happens next isn't just revenge, it's justice, and you won't want to miss it. My name is Daniel Carter. I've served in the U.S. Army for 12 years. I've deployed 3 times, missed birthdays, anniversaries, and more holidays than I can count. But through all of it, there was one thing that kept me grounded, my home. It wasn't a mansion. Just a modest 2-story house in a quiet suburban neighborhood governed by a homeowners association. Clean streets. Identical mailboxes. Perfectly trimmed lawns. The kind of place where rules mattered more than relationships. The HOA president, Karen Whitmore, took those rules very seriously. Before my last deployment, I made sure everything was handled properly. I submitted copies of my official orders to the HOA board. I set up automatic payments for my monthly dues. I even hired a lawn service to maintain the yard while I was gone. My neighbor, Mr. Lopez, promised to keep an eye on things and collect any stray packages. I wasn't careless. But Karen had always had a problem with me. It started small, warning letters about the height of my flagpole. Complaints that my trash bins were visible from the sidewalk for too long. One time, she fined me because my grass was a 1/4 inch above regulation during a week of heavy rain. Still, I paid every fine. Followed every rule. I didn't want trouble. 2 months into my deployment, I received an email from the HOA citing concerns about property neglect. I responded immediately, reminding them I was active duty overseas and that all maintenance was prepaid. They replied with a generic acknowledgement. Nothing else. At least, nothing that I knew about. What I didn't realize was that behind closed HOA meetings and quiet board votes, they had started labeling my property as at risk. And while I was thousands of miles away serving my country, they were making plans for my house. Deployment has a way of narrowing your world. Out there, nothing exists beyond the mission, your unit, and the next sunrise. Days blurred into heat waves and dust storms. Nights were interrupted by distant explosions and radio chatter. You learn to sleep lightly. You learn to carry tension in your shoulders like it belongs there. But even in the worst moments, I held onto one image, my house. The porch light glowing at dusk. The creak in the 3rd stair. The dent in the garage wall from when I misjudged the trash can years ago. Home wasn't just a place, it was proof that all of this meant something. About 2 months into deployment, I started receiving HOA notices by email. Lawn condition not compliant. Mailbox maintenance issue. Exterior appearance concerns. Each message felt colder than the last. I responded every time. Attached proof of my lawn service contract. provided Mr. Lopez's contact information, reminded them, respectfully, that I was active duty overseas and protected under federal law. Their replies became shorter. Then they stopped replying altogether. I tried calling once, but the time difference in field operations made it nearly impossible to follow up. Eventually, I had to focus on survival, on keeping my team safe, on getting through each day. I assumed the silence meant it was handled. I was wrong. When I returned home and found strangers living inside my house, the reality hit me like a punch to the chest. The man at the door introduced himself as Mark. He looked nervous, shifting his toddler from one hip to the other. "We signed a 12-month lease," he explained, "through the HOA Property Management Division. They said the owner abandoned it. Said the association had authority to rent it to prevent deterioration. Abandoned it." I stood there in uniform, dust still clinging to my boots from the base shuttle. "I've been deployed," I said quietly. "That house was never abandoned." Mark's face drained of color. He invited me inside to show me the lease agreement. Walking into my own living room felt surreal. My furniture was still there, but rearranged. Family photos were gone from the walls. The flag that had hung in my hallway was missing. The locks had been changed. The HOA had authorized a locksmith. They had even installed new smoke detectors and documented it as safety remediation. On paper, they had built a story. According to the lease, the HOA invoked a clause in the bylaws allowing temporary control of a property deemed vacant and neglected. They claimed repeated violations, no owner response, and community risk. They charged Mark first month's rent and security deposit. The money never went to me. When I left Mark's house, my house, I drove straight to the HOA office. Karen Whitmore greeted me with a polite, almost rehearsed smile. "Daniel," she said, folding her hands neatly on the desk, "we were under the impression you had vacated the property. I sent you my deployment orders." "You didn't respond to multiple certified notices," she replied calmly. "I was in a combat zone." She sighed like I was inconveniencing her. "The board voted unanimously," she continued. "The property showed signs of abandonment. Mail overflow. Lawn inconsistencies. Exterior neglect. I had a lawn service. Our inspection reports indicate otherwise." Inspection reports. They had documented everything, photographed minor issues, compiled violation logs, created a timeline. It looked official. Clean. Justifiable. "You rented my home without consent," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "We acted in the best interest of the community," Karen replied. "You're welcome to wait until the lease expires. It's only 10 more months." 10 months. She expected me to just accept it. In that moment, I realized something terrifying. They weren't nervous. They believed they were protected. By paperwork. By bureaucracy. By the assumption that I was just one person too tired, too busy, too alone to fight back. That night, I checked into a motel 5 miles away. Combat had taught me how to stay calm under pressure. But lying in that unfamiliar bed, staring at a water-stained ceiling instead of my own, something shifted inside me. This wasn't just about property. This was about being erased. They had decided that because I wasn't physically present, I didn't matter. That my service made me inconvenient. That distance made me powerless. The next morning, I started making calls. Not angry calls. Strategic ones. Because if there's one thing the Army teaches you, it's this. When someone makes a mistake that bold, you don't react emotionally. You respond tactically. The first thing the Army teaches you about conflict is this: emotion gets you killed. So I didn't storm back into the HOA office. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I gathered intelligence. Back in my motel room, I spread every document across the small round table: HOA bylaws, email chains, violation notices, deployment orders, bank statements showing automatic payments never missed. I started building a timeline. Date of deployment. Date of lawn service payments. Dates of HOA complaints. Dates of certified notices they claimed I ignored. That's when I saw it. Every certified letter had been sent to my home address. The same home they claimed was abandoned. They knew I was deployed. I had emailed them my orders. Yet they sent physical notices to an empty house, documented no response, and used that silence as justification. It wasn't negligence. It was strategy. The next call I made was to the base legal assistance office. Within 24 hours, I had a JAG officer reviewing my case. "You may be protected under the Service Members Civil Relief Act," she told me. "If they took action against your property without proper due process during deployment, that's serious." Serious. I liked the sound of that. The HOA's lawyer didn't. 2 days after my legal inquiry was sent, I received a formal letter on thick white paper. Cease and desist. It accused me of harassment. Claimed my public accusations could damage the association's reputation. Warned of defamation if I continued to contact tenants or board members. They were trying to intimidate me. That's when I knew I was getting close. Meanwhile, the tenants, Mark and his wife, Alicia, were caught in the middle. They had 2 small kids. They weren't villains. They had answered an online listing, toured the property with an HOA representative, signed what looked like legitimate paperwork. They were victims too. "I swear we didn't know," Mark told me one evening when we met at a coffee shop. "They told us the owner moved overseas permanently." Overseas permanently. That lie burned deeper than anything else. I reassured them I wouldn't throw them out without notice. The last thing I wanted was another family displaced. But I needed their copy of the lease, every page. They handed it over. Buried in the fine print was something alarming. The rental payments were being routed through a property management company I had never heard of. Whitmore Property Services. Whitmore. Karen's last name. That wasn't a coincidence. I ran a public records search. The property management company was registered to her cousin. Now it wasn't just about overreach. It was about profit. Within a week, word started spreading through the neighborhood. Mr. Lopez had told a few people what happened. Some neighbors avoided eye contact. Others quietly approached me in their driveways. "They find us when my husband was deployed too," one woman whispered. Threatened foreclosure. Another neighbor showed me violation notices over trivial issues: trash can lids, flower color, parking angles. The HOA wasn't just strict. It was predatory. I decided to take one calculated step. I posted the story online. No exaggeration. No insults. Just facts. Timeline. Documents. Photos of my deployment orders. A copy of the lease with my address. Within 48 hours, it exploded. Local veteran groups shared it. A regional news station reached out. Comments flooded in from other service members describing similar tactics in other communities. The HOA panicked. An emergency board meeting was announced. Residents only. No media allowed. I attended. The room was packed. Karen stood at the front, calm but pale. "These accusations are misleading," she said smoothly. "The board acted within its legal authority to protect property values." I raised my hand. "You declared my home abandoned while I was deployed. You changed the locks. You collected rent. And you funneled it through a company tied to your family." A murmur rippled through the room. Karen's smile tightened. "Our legal counsel advises we refrain from discussing ongoing matters." Of course. After the meeting, I received another letter, this time threatening to fine me for disruptive conduct and bringing negative publicity to the community. They were escalating. So was I. Through a veterans advocacy group, I was connected to a civilian attorney who specialized in HOA abuse cases. When he reviewed the documents, he leaned back in his chair and said something I'll never forget. "They didn't just overstep," he said. "They exposed themselves." He filed a formal demand letter accusing the HOA of unlawful seizure of property, breach of fiduciary duty, and violation of federal protections for active duty service members. The response from their attorney came fast. They refused settlement. They claimed emergency authority. They denied financial misconduct. And at the bottom of the letter was a line that felt almost personal. "Our client is prepared to litigate this matter to the fullest extent." Translation? They thought I'd run out of money before they ran out of paperwork. Hotel bills were stacking up. Legal consultations weren't cheap. I was burning through savings faster than I had overseas fuel reserves. But something unexpected happened. A GoFundMe page appeared, created by a local veterans group. Donations poured in. Messages of support. Offers of testimony. Retired officers reaching out with advice. I wasn't alone anymore. The pressure shifted. Then came the breaking point. My attorney received internal HOA meeting minutes through a whistleblower, a junior board member uncomfortable with what had happened. In those minutes was a sentence that changed everything. Deployment status provides low-risk opportunity for temporary asset control. Low-risk opportunity. They had targeted me because I was deployed. Because I was far away. Because they believed distance meant silence. When my attorney read that line aloud in his office, I felt something colder than anger settle in my chest. This wasn't just about reclaiming my house anymore. It was about exposing a system that preyed on absence. Karen had once told me, with a smirk, "You don't have the resources to fight this." She was wrong. Because I had something stronger than resources. I had proof. And now, I had witnesses. The battlefield had shifted from my driveway to a courtroom. I thought I was fighting to get my house back. I was wrong. I was about to uncover something much bigger. It started with the whistleblower, a quiet board member named Ethan who asked to meet in private. We met in the back corner of a hardware store parking lot, like something out of a bad spy movie. He looked nervous. Kept checking over his shoulder. "I didn't agree with what they did," he said, handing me a flash drive. But I didn't realize how far it went. Far it went. When my attorney loaded the files onto his laptop, the room went silent. Email chains. Internal memos. Financial spreadsheets. And one subject line that made my stomach drop. Deployment pattern strategy. Strategy. This wasn't an isolated decision made in panic. It was a system. Over the past 3 years, the HOA had flagged multiple properties belonging to deployed service members. They monitored social media for departure announcements. Checked public military forums. Verified deployment timelines. When a service member left for extended duty, the board labeled the property at risk. Minor violations were documented aggressively, even fabricated in some cases. Certified notices were mailed to empty homes. Lack of response was recorded as abandonment. Then they voted. Temporary asset control. They would invoke a vague emergency clause in the bylaws, change the locks, and transfer management oversight to Whitmore Property Services, Karen's cousin's company. The homes were rented out. Profits were split. The spreadsheets showed it clearly: rental income routed through the management company, maintenance deductions skimmed off the top, and remaining funds partially transferred back to HOA reserves. They weren't just abusing authority. They were running a business model. And it targeted deployed soldiers. My case wasn't unique. It was just the first one to come back. There were 3 other names in the documents, all active duty members who had deployed within the last 2 years. 2 had returned and quietly paid legal fees to recover their homes. 1 was still overseas, unaware. I contacted the others. The first was a Marine Staff Sergeant named Alvarez. When I explained what I'd found, there was a long pause on the phone. "They told me it was a misunderstanding," he said finally. "I thought I'd missed some paperwork." "You didn't miss paperwork. You were selected." The second was an Air Force tech sergeant who had refinanced his home to pay settlement fees, believing he'd violated HOA policy. The third, still deployed, had no idea his house was currently occupied by tenants. That call was the hardest. He was still in uniform when I reached him. Static crackled through the line. "They're what?" he asked quietly. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just corruption. It was predation. But the real twist came from somewhere none of us expected. The tenants in my house. Mark had been uneasy ever since learning the truth. He'd gone back through his original rental paperwork. Something didn't add up. The HOA representative who showed him the property had rushed the process, insisting demand was high. Mark had asked for proof of ownership. He was told the HOA had legal custodial rights due to abandonment. But buried in his email inbox was something strange, an unsigned draft lease agreement that referenced a different version of the HOA bylaws. An older version. My attorney compared the two. The clause Karen relied on, the one allowing temporary control of abandoned property, had been amended just 6 months before my deployment. And here's the key part. The amendment vote never met quorum requirements. Meaning? It wasn't legally valid. They had updated the bylaws without proper resident approval, which meant the clause they used to justify taking my house didn't legally exist. When this information surfaced, everything shifted. Our lawsuit expanded. Now it wasn't just unlawful seizure and federal violations. It was fraud, forgery, breach of fiduciary duty, possible criminal conspiracy. And that's when law enforcement got involved. A forensic audit was ordered. Bank records revealed rental deposits from 4 properties over a 2-year span, all belonging to deployed service members. Over $180,000 in gross rental income. A significant portion had been funneled into accounts connected to Whitmore Property Services. But here's the part that stunned everyone. Some of the funds were used to cover HOA budget shortfalls. Karen had been quietly overspending on community enhancements, landscaping contracts awarded to friends, security upgrades that never materialized, consulting fees with vague descriptions. When the HOA reserves began thinning out, she needed revenue. And deployed homes provided it. Low risk. Low resistance. Low oversight. Until now. The media picked it up. HOA accused of targeting deployed soldiers for rental scheme. Veterans organizations rallied behind us. Legal representation became pro bono. State regulators opened an investigation into HOA governance violations. And then, the final twist. Ethan, the whistleblower, delivered one more file. An audio recording from a closed-door HOA meeting. Karen's voice was clear. "These properties are idle assets," she said. "If owners choose to leave for extended periods, the community shouldn't suffer. We have authority. And frankly, they're too busy overseas to contest it. Too busy overseas." The room went silent when the recording ended. My attorney leaned forward slowly. "That," he said, "is intent. Not a misunderstanding. Not a technical error. Intent. They hadn't made a mistake. They'd made a calculation. And they calculated wrong. Because the one thing they hadn't factored in was what happens when the soldier comes home. Not just one soldier. All of us. Now it wasn't 4 isolated cases. It was a coordinated pattern. A scheme. And the battlefield had officially expanded beyond HOA meetings and legal letters. It was about to become a public reckoning. Karen once believed deployment made us powerless. She forgot something critical about military training. We adapt. We regroup. And when necessary, we counterattack. The courtroom was standing room only. Veterans filled the back rows: Army, Marine Corps, Air Force, even a few retirees wearing old unit caps. Reporters lined the walls. Cameras waited outside. And at the front of the room sat Karen Whitmore. For the first time since this started, she didn't look composed. The civil hearing had evolved into something larger. With the state investigation underway and evidence of financial misconduct piling up, prosecutors had joined the case. What began as a property dispute was now centered on fraud, unlawful seizure, and abuse of authority. When my attorney stood, he didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. He laid everything out methodically. Deployment orders. HOA emails acknowledging receipt. Certified letters sent knowingly to an empty house. The invalid bylaw amendment passed without quorum. Financial transfers linking rental income to Whitmore Property Services. And finally, the audio recording. The judge listened to Karen's voice echo through the courtroom. These properties are idle assets, they're too busy overseas to contest it. The silence that followed was heavier than any explosion I'd heard overseas. Karen's attorney attempted damage control. Claimed administrative error. Claimed misunderstanding of procedural requirements. Claimed the rental income had been held in reserve. But the forensic accountant called to the stand dismantled that defense piece by piece. Funds had been redirected. Withdrawals categorized as consulting disbursements. Maintenance charges billed to homes that showed no repair records. Budget deficits quietly patched with rental proceeds. This wasn't negligence. It was deliberate. Then I was called to testify. I walked to the stand in my dress uniform. Not for drama. For clarity. I described the day I deployed. The paperwork submitted. The confirmations received. I described sleeping in armored vehicles, eating MREs in 120-degree heat, and believing my home was secure because I had done everything responsibly. Then I described coming back. The unfamiliar curtains. The key that didn't turn. A stranger holding a child in my doorway. I wasn't asking for special treatment, I said calmly. I was asking for the same protection any homeowner deserves. Instead, I was targeted because I was serving. The judge leaned forward slightly. Did you ever authorize the HOA to rent your property? He asked. No, Your Honor. Did you receive rental income? No, Your Honor. Were you informed of any board vote transferring control of your home? No. Mark and Alicia testified next. They explained how the HOA representative assured them the owner had permanently relocated. How they were rushed to sign. How rent payments were directed through Whitmore Property Services. Then Ethan took the stand. He confirmed the board never met quorum for the bylaw amendment. Confirmed that deployment status was discussed strategically. Confirmed concerns were dismissed when he raised them internally. By the time closing arguments began, the atmosphere had shifted. Karen's composure cracked. When the prosecutor referenced the phrase low-risk opportunity, her jaw tightened visibly. The judge didn't deliberate long. When he returned, every chair creaked as people straightened. This court finds that the Homeowners Association acted beyond its lawful authority, he began. The seizure and rental of the plaintiff's property were unauthorized and executed in bad faith. He ordered immediate restoration of possession. Declared all rental agreements void under fraudulent representation. Ordered restitution of all collected rental income with interest. Imposed significant civil penalties against the HOA. And then he added something that made the room collectively inhale. The evidence presented indicates potential criminal misconduct. This matter will be referred to the district attorney's office for further action. Karen's attorney leaned toward her, whispering urgently. She didn't look powerful anymore. She looked small. Outside the courthouse, reporters shouted questions. Microphones were pushed forward. Cameras flashed. I didn't celebrate. I didn't smile. Because this was never about spectacle. It was about accountability. Within weeks, a special meeting of the HOA members was called. Emergency vote. Residents packed the community center. The motion to remove Karen as president passed overwhelmingly. Board members who had supported the scheme resigned under pressure. State regulators initiated a formal audit. Whitmore Property Services lost its license pending investigation. And as for Karen? She was escorted from the building that night without applause, without allies, without authority. The same quiet sidewalks she once patrolled with warning notices now felt different. Because the illusion of untouchable power had shattered. But the real climax wasn't in the courtroom. It was the moment I stood back in my living room. No strangers. No rearranged furniture. No unauthorized locks. Just silence. And ownership. They thought distance made me vulnerable. They thought deployment meant absence. They believed bureaucracy would outlast resolve. What they never understood was this. Service doesn't weaken you. It sharpens you. And when you train people to face conflict head-on, they don't fold under pressure. They finish the mission. A month later, the neighborhood felt different. Quieter. Not because people were afraid, but because something unspoken had shifted. The illusion of unchecked authority was gone. The HOA board was restructured, new oversight rules were implemented, and residents demanded transparency in every decision moving forward. The rental funds were returned to me, every dollar, plus interest. Mark and his family were relocated with assistance from the court, and we parted on good terms. They had been caught in someone else's scheme, just like I had. The state investigation continued, but for me, the fight was over. One evening, I stood on my porch as the sun dipped below the rooftops. The same porch light flickered on. The same flag waved gently beside the garage. This time, nothing felt uncertain. I hadn't just reclaimed my house. I had protected something bigger, the principle that service should never be exploited. They thought distance made me powerless. But they forgot something simple. We don't fight alone. And when one of us comes home to injustice, we stand together.